Look at this black guy acting like that rusty motorcycle belongs in a museum. Sergeant Travis Kane sneered as he ripped the registration from Isaiah Grant's hand and slapped it onto the hood of his patrol cruiser. Isaiah, a 59-year-old black man in a faded riding jacket, stood silently as dozens of people watched. "You verified the registration," Isaiah said. "The motorcycle is legal." Kane laughed. "Men like you always think a piece of paper makes you untouchable." Officer Eric Dalton smirked and kicked the motorcycle onto its side. Metal crashed against pavement. The crowd gasped. Dalton grabbed a metal bar. "Maybe once we turn this junk into scrap, you'll finally understand who gives the orders around here." He swung. Crack. The fuel tank buckled. Isaiah stared at the damaged engraving left by his fallen friend decades earlier. "Stop." Kane stepped closer and shoved Isaiah against the patrol cruiser. "Or what? You think anybody here cares who you are?" Dalton struck the motorcycle again. Isaiah slowly raised his eyes. "You should make sure your report is accurate." Kane laughed, but Officer Luke Brennan suddenly froze at the patrol computer. "Sergeant." His face went pale. "You need to see who this man is." Kane didn't know it yet, but the man he had just humiliated wore 4 stars. "Stay with us, because what happens next will turn this entire scene upside down." Comment your city and local time below, and subscribe if you believe respect should never depend on rank, money, or power. 3 hours before metal struck the motorcycle in Redwood Falls Square, Isaiah Grant was riding alone beneath a pale Virginia morning sky. The highway stretched between wooded hills, still wet from overnight rain. His old 1978 Ironwood V-twin moved steadily beneath him, its engine carrying a deep, uneven rhythm that Isaiah knew better than most voices. At 59, Isaiah could have chosen an easier way to travel. Instead, he preferred this. No driver, no schedule being whispered into his ear, no one watching his every movement. Just the road. He wore faded jeans, worn brown boots, and a dark riding jacket that had seen better years. Nothing about him suggested wealth or influence. To anyone passing him, he was simply an older black man riding an old motorcycle through Virginia. That was exactly how Isaiah wanted it. He reached down briefly and touched the side of the fuel tank. Near the bottom was a hand-carved inscription, weathered but still visible. "Brothers make it home." Isaiah's fingers rested there for a second. "Almost there, Danny," he murmured. Danny Mercer had carved those words decades earlier. Danny had also once owned the motorcycle. And before the day ended, Isaiah intended to fulfill a promise he had carried for years. A small locked compartment was mounted beside the bike. Inside sat a wooden box containing a photograph, an old watch, several letters, and one item Isaiah had guarded carefully for more than 2 decades. They belonged with Danny's family. Isaiah had promised himself he would deliver them personally. By noon, a sign appeared ahead. "Welcome to Redwood Falls." Isaiah slowed. The town center was unusually crowded. Banners stretched across the streets for the annual Redwood Falls Community Festival. Food stands lined the sidewalks. Music played from a temporary stage. Families moved between booths while motorcycles and classic cars occupied designated spaces around the square. Isaiah considered continuing. Then he smelled coffee. 10 minutes later, the motorcycle was parked near the edge of the square. Isaiah removed his gloves and ordered a black coffee from a small stand. "Beautiful bike," the vendor said. Isaiah glanced toward it. "Belonged to a friend. You restore it yourself?" "Most of it." The vendor smiled. "Your friend would be proud." Isaiah looked at the engraving. "I hope so." Across the square, Sergeant Travis Kane was watching him. Kane had been assigned festival patrol with officers Eric Dalton and Luke Brennan. After nearly 20 years in uniform, Kane carried himself like a man accustomed to people moving when he approached. He pointed toward Isaiah's motorcycle. "Dalton, look at that plate." Dalton glanced over. "What about it?" "Old bike. Out-of-county registration." Brennan looked too. "Could just be somebody passing through?" Kane was already walking. Isaiah had taken only 2 sips of coffee when a voice came from behind him. "You own that motorcycle?" Isaiah turned. 3 officers stood several feet away. "I do." Kane held out his hand. "License and registration." Isaiah studied him briefly. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Sergeant." Isaiah nodded. "Sergeant." Kane waited. Isaiah placed his coffee down, walked to the motorcycle, opened a weathered leather pouch, and removed the documents. Kane examined them. His eyes moved from the registration to Isaiah, then back again. "This motorcycle is almost 50 years old." 48. Dalton chuckled. "Keeping count?" Isaiah ignored him. Kane studied the VIN information. "Where did you get it?" It belonged to a friend. What friend? Isaiah looked at him. Is that relevant to the registration? Something changed in Kane's expression. It was subtle, but Brennan noticed it. Kane stepped closer. When I ask a question, you answer it. Isaiah remained composed. The motorcycle was transferred legally. Everything you need is on that document. Dalton walked around the bike. Looks rebuilt. It has been. Pot stolen? Isaiah turned toward him. No. Dalton smiled. Just asking. Brennan took the registration from Kane. I can run it. Kane handed it over without looking at him. Do that. Brennan returned to the patrol cruiser. Isaiah waited. Children laughed near the fountain. Music continued playing. People moved around them, mostly unaware that the mood near the motorcycle had changed. Kane noticed the locked compartment mounted beside the rear wheel. What's in there? Personal property. Open it. Isaiah looked directly at him. Why? Dalton laughed. Kane's jaw tightened. Because I told you to. Isaiah's voice remained calm. If there's a legal reason to search it, tell me. Kane stepped closer. You're getting awfully comfortable telling police officers what they can and can't do. I'm asking a question. No, you're testing me. Isaiah's expression didn't change. Behind them, Brennan entered the motorcycle information into the patrol computer. The system processed for several seconds. Then the registration appeared. Valid. Brennan leaned toward the window. Sergeant, registration checks out. Isaiah looked at Kane. There you go. That was the wrong sentence. Kane slowly turned toward him. What did you say? I said the registration checks out. I heard what you said. Kane stepped within arm's reach. You think because the computer says the plate is valid, we're finished? Isaiah glanced toward Brennan. If there's another legitimate issue, explain it. Dalton shook his head. This guy really likes telling cops how to work. Isaiah took a slow breath. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't refused identification. I haven't interfered with anything. Kane pointed toward the locked compartment, then opened the box. No. The word was quiet, but final. Several nearby people turned. Kane stared at Isaiah. Isaiah continued. Not without a lawful reason. For the first time, Kane smiled. It wasn't friendly. All right. He stepped backward and rested one hand on his belt. If you want to make this difficult, we can make it difficult. Brennan looked again at his computer. Something new had appeared beneath the registration information. A secondary verification notice. He frowned. He had never seen one quite like it. Kane pointed toward the motorcycle. Step away from the bike. Isaiah did not move immediately. His eyes shifted toward the locked wooden compartment containing the last pieces of Danny Mercer's story. Then back to Kane. Sergeant, he said quietly, you should think carefully about what you're doing next. Kane's smile disappeared. To him, it sounded like a threat. And that misunderstanding was about to turn a simple registration check into something none of them could undo. Isaiah slowly stepped away from the motorcycle. He kept his hands visible. No sudden movements. No raised voice. Yet Sergeant Travis Kane watched him as though he were waiting for an excuse. Back toward the cruiser, Kane ordered. Isaiah took 2 steps. That enough? I'll tell you when it's enough. Officer Eric Dalton moved toward the locked compartment. Isaiah immediately noticed. I already told you that box is private property. Dalton tapped the lock with one finger. Then you shouldn't mind showing us what's inside. That isn't how consent works. Kane gave a humorless laugh. You hear this guy? Suddenly, he's a constitutional scholar. A few people nearby stopped walking. One woman raised her phone. Isaiah noticed but said nothing. Kane did. Put that phone away. The woman hesitated. I'm standing in a public square. Kane stared at her before turning back to Isaiah. The audience around them was growing. That only seemed to make Kane more determined. Last chance, he said. Open the box. No. Kane stepped forward. You enjoy making things difficult? I enjoy knowing why my property is being searched. Dalton shook his head. Guys like you always have an answer. Isaiah's eyes narrowed slightly. Guys like me? Brennan looked up from the patrol computer. Sergeant. Kane ignored him. Brennan tried again. Sergeant, I need you to look at this. What? The registration is valid. VIN matches. No stolen vehicle report. I heard you the first time. There's something else. Kane walked over reluctantly. Brennan pointed at the screen. Beneath Isaiah Grant's information was a notice neither officer expected. Identity verification restricted. Authorized contact required. Kane frowned. What does that mean? I'm not sure. Then it means nothing. Brennan shook his head. I think we should call the number attached to the record. Kane glanced toward Isaiah. The older black man stood quietly beside the cruiser, surrounded by strangers holding phones. To Kane, backing down now would look like weakness. We're not calling anybody. Sergeant, I said no. Kane returned to Isaiah. We're impounding the motorcycle. Isaiah stared at him. For what violation? Pending verification. Officer Brennan just told you the registration is valid. Kane pointed toward the locked compartment. And you're refusing to cooperate. I'm refusing a search without a stated legal basis. Dalton walked behind the motorcycle. Then maybe we take the whole thing. He reached toward the handlebars. Isaiah's voice sharpened. Be careful with that motorcycle. Dalton looked over his shoulder. Or what? Just be careful. Dalton smirked. Then he deliberately kicked the side stand backward. The motorcycle tipped. Isaiah moved instinctively. Stop! The heavy machine crashed onto the pavement. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The mirror shattered. Chrome scraped concrete. A leather pouch burst open. An old photograph slid across the pavement and stopped near Kane's boot. Isaiah froze. For the first time, the calm disappeared from his face. Kane bent down and picked up the photograph. It showed two much younger black soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder beside the same motorcycle. One was unmistakably Isaiah. The other was Danny Mercer. Kane turned the photograph over. There was faded handwriting on the back. Brothers make it home. Kane looked at Isaiah. So that's the story? Isaiah held out his hand. Give me the photograph. You served? Isaiah said nothing. Dalton laughed. Everybody's a war hero once they get stopped. Isaiah looked directly at him. Pick up the motorcycle. Dalton's smile faded. What? You knocked it down. Pick it up. Kane stepped between them. You don't give orders here. Isaiah's gaze remained fixed on the photograph in Kane's hand. That picture belonged to a man who earned more respect than you're showing it. Kane glanced at the photograph again, then dropped it. It landed face down on the pavement. Something in Isaiah's expression changed. Not fear, not panic. Something colder, controlled. Pick it up, Isaiah said. The crowd became silent. Kane stepped close enough that Isaiah could smell coffee on his breath. You need to remember your position right now. Isaiah slowly looked around, at Dalton beside the fallen motorcycle, at Brennan standing uneasily by the cruiser, at the phones recording everything, then back at Kane. I know exactly where I'm standing. Kane's face tightened. He reached for his handcuffs. Turn around. Brennan immediately stepped forward. Sergeant, wait. Kane pointed at him. Stay out of it. He hasn't done anything. He's refusing lawful instructions and escalating the situation. Isaiah almost looked surprised. I'm escalating it? Turn around. Isaiah remained still for one long second. Then he turned voluntarily and placed his hands behind his back. Kane snapped the first cuff around his wrist. Several people in the crowd protested. Brennan looked from Isaiah to the patrol computer. The restricted verification notice was still flashing. Then another line appeared beneath it. Contact authorized federal liaison before detention. Brennan's stomach tightened. Sergeant Kane. Kane locked the second cuff. What now? Brennan stared at the screen. We really need to make that call. But Kane had already decided that the man standing in front of him needed to be taught a lesson. And beside the fallen motorcycle, Dalton was reaching for the locked compartment. Dalton crouched beside the fallen motorcycle and pulled a small pry bar from his equipment bag. Isaiah heard the metal scrape against the lock. He turned immediately. Don't open that box. Kane tightened his grip on Isaiah's arm. Face the cruiser. That property doesn't belong to you. Neither does the decision anymore. Dalton wedged the tool beneath the compartment latch. Isaiah's voice dropped. There are things inside that box that belong to a dead man's family. Dalton paused. For 1 second, Isaiah thought that might be enough. Then Kane laughed. You expect us to believe that? Isaiah looked at him. I don't care whether you believe me. I'm telling you not to destroy it. Kane nodded toward Dalton. Open it. Dalton pushed harder. The latch groaned. Around them, more phones rose. A woman near the fountain stepped closer, recording everything. Her name was Elena Torres. She had been filming since the motorcycle hit the pavement. Officer, Elena called out. He isn't resisting. Kane turned. Stay back. I'm already back. Stop recording. Elena lowered the phone slightly. Why? Because you're interfering with police activity. I'm standing 20 feet away. Kane took a step toward her. Isaiah spoke before he could move farther. Leave her alone. Kane spun back. You really don't know when to stop talking. He shoved Isaiah against the hood. The crowd reacted angrily. Brennan moved forward. Sergeant, that's enough. Kane stared at him. What did you say? I said he's cuffed. He's cooperating. And I said stay out of it. Brennan glanced toward the patrol computer. The warning remained on the screen. Contact authorized federal liaison before detention. Then let me make the verification call. No. Why not? Kane's eyes hardened. Because I'm supervising this scene. Behind them came a sharp, metallic snap. The compartment lock broke. Isaiah closed his eyes for half a second. Dalton opened the damaged latch. Inside sat a small wooden box. He reached for it. "Don't," Isaiah said. Dalton lifted it anyway. Kane walked over and took the box. Isaiah turned as far as the handcuffs allowed. Put it back. Kane opened the lid. Inside were several carefully preserved letters, an old wristwatch, a folded photograph, and a small cloth pouch. Kane picked up one of the letters. Daniel Mercer. Read. Isaiah's voice became dangerously quiet. "Put that down." Kane glanced at him. "Friend of yours?" "He was." "Another soldier?" Isaiah said nothing. Kane smiled. "Thought so." He dropped the letter back into the box. "Everybody has a story." Dalton turned his attention to the motorcycle. "Want me to secure this thing for towing?" "Do it." Dalton grabbed the handlebars and dragged the motorcycle several inches across the pavement. Metal screamed against concrete. Isaiah flinched. "Lift it. Don't drag it." Dalton looked at Kane. Kane shrugged. "You heard him. Apparently he's the motorcycle expert." Dalton smiled. Then his eyes landed on the inscription across the fuel tank. "Brothers make it home." He tapped it with the pry bar. "This sentimental too?" Isaiah took a step away from the cruiser. Kane immediately yanked him backward. "Stay where you are. Tell him to leave the tank alone." Dalton raised the bar. Brennan saw what was about to happen. "Eric, don't." Dalton swung. Crack. The bar struck the tank. A woman in the crowd shouted. Isaiah went completely still. Dalton hit it again. Crack. The metal folded inward directly through Danny's hand-carved inscription. The words were split by a deep dent. Isaiah stared at them. For 27 years, that engraving had survived rain, heat, thousands of miles, and every repair the motorcycle had ever needed. 2 careless blows had nearly erased it. His breathing changed. Kane noticed. "There it is," he said. Finally got a reaction. Isaiah slowly raised his head. "You think this is funny?" Kane stepped closer. "I think you should have cooperated." "I did cooperate." "You refused the search." "I exercised a right." Dalton laughed behind him. Kane leaned closer. "You can argue about your rights when you file your complaint." Isaiah held his gaze. "You should make sure your report is accurate." Kane smirked. "Trust me, it will be." Elena's phone captured every word. Kane noticed the lens again. "I told you to stop recording. And I told you I'm not interfering." Kane marched toward her. "Give me the phone." Elena stepped backward. "No. Give it to me." Brennan moved between them. "Sergeant." Kane stopped. Brennan did not move. "She's standing in public. Let her record." For several seconds, neither officer spoke. Then Kane pointed toward the cruiser. "You want to challenge me in front of civilians? I want us to stop making this worse." Kane's expression hardened. "You're done here. Get in the cruiser." Brennan looked at Isaiah, then at the destroyed motorcycle. Finally, he obeyed. Minutes later, Isaiah was placed in the back of another patrol vehicle. As it pulled away, he looked through the window at Danny's motorcycle lying damaged in the square. Elena was still recording. Back at the station, Kane sat at his computer and began typing. Subject became verbally confrontational during lawful investigation. He continued. Subject repeatedly refused officer commands and displayed increasingly aggressive behavior. Across the room, Brennan silently opened his body camera footage. He watched Isaiah hand over his license. He watched him step backward when ordered. He watched him place his hands behind his back voluntarily. He watched Dalton destroy the motorcycle. Then Brennan looked toward Kane's report. Not one of the accusations matched what the camera showed. His eyes returned to the flashing verification notice. For the first time that afternoon, Brennan understood something far more frightening than Isaiah Grant's hidden identity. If Kane was willing to lie about what 50 witnesses had just seen, there was no telling how many times he had done it when nobody was watching. Brennan watched the footage twice. Then a third time. Nothing changed. Isaiah had never threatened anyone. He had never resisted. He had never raised a hand. Yet across the room, Kane was building an entirely different version of what had happened. Brennan closed the video window when Kane approached. "You finish your supplemental report?" "Not yet." Kane dropped a printed statement onto his desk. "Use mine for the timeline." Brennan read the first paragraph. Subject became hostile after officers identified inconsistencies in vehicle documentation. He looked up. There weren't any inconsistencies. Kane's expression changed. "Excuse me?" "The registration was valid. The identity verification wasn't complete." "That isn't the same thing." Kane leaned closer. "Luke, I've been doing this job 19 years. Don't start confusing hesitation with integrity." Then he walked away. Brennan stared after him. Down the hallway, Isaiah sat alone in an interview room. His wrists were no longer cuffed, but the red marks remained. Kane entered carrying several papers. Sign. Isaiah looked at them. What am I signing? Your acknowledgement of the incident. Isaiah read the first page. His expression remained controlled. Then he reached a sentence describing him as physically intimidating and verbally aggressive. He placed the document back on the table. No. Kane folded his arms. Why? Because it isn't true. You raised your voice. After your officer damaged property. You refused commands. I refused an unsupported search. Kane leaned over the table. You really think you're going to win this argument? Isaiah looked up. This isn't an argument. What is it? A record. Kane laughed. You think somebody important is going to come running because your antique motorcycle got scratched? For several seconds, Isaiah said nothing. Then he answered quietly. You should be more concerned about what your officers did than about who might come looking for me. Kane straightened. Again, he heard arrogance. Again, he missed the warning. Across town, Elena Torres uploaded a 90-second video from the square. The clip began with Isaiah already handcuffed. It showed Dalton striking the fuel tank. It showed Kane confronting Elena. And it clearly captured Brennan saying Isaiah had been cooperating. Within 40 minutes, thousands of people had watched it. At the station, Chief Rebecca Holloway received the link. She watched the clip without speaking. Then she called Kane into her office. What happened? Kane remained confident. Non-compliant subject. Suspicious vehicle. Possible concealed property. Crowd got involved. Holloway turned her monitor toward him. This doesn't look good. A phone video never shows everything. Was the motorcycle stolen? Still investigating. Was the registration valid? Kane hesitated. Technically. Holloway stared at him. Technically? There was an identity restriction. Then, verify the identity. We're working on it. Holloway leaned back. Do it quickly. Kane left her office with his jaw clenched. He found Brennan at the patrol computer. Anything? Brennan had already entered Isaiah's information into a deeper verification portal. Most fields were ordinary. Name, date of birth, Virginia address. Then he reached a section marked Restricted Profile, Access Denied. Beneath it appeared a contact number. There's a federal verification line attached to his identity. Dalton, standing nearby, laughed. What is he, a spy? Brennan ignored him. We should call. Kane stared at the number. For the first time, uncertainty appeared in his face. Then the station doors opened. An elderly woman walked inside. She was small, silver-haired, and breathing hard as though she had rushed from her car. I need to speak to whoever arrested Isaiah Grant. Kane turned. That would be me. The woman approached him. My name is Margaret Mercer. Isaiah heard the name from the interview room. His head lifted. Margaret looked through the glass. Their eyes met. Her face softened. Isaiah. Then she noticed something through another window overlooking the secured parking area. The motorcycle, or what remained of it. Margaret stopped breathing for a moment. No. She walked closer to the glass. The broken mirror hung downward. The side was scratched, and the fuel tank carried the deep dent through Danny's engraving. Margaret placed one hand against the window. Oh, Danny. Kane frowned. You know the motorcycle? Margaret turned slowly. That was my son's. Dalton stopped smiling. Margaret walked toward Kane. My son rebuilt that machine with Isaiah before his last deployment. Kane crossed his arms. Ma'am, we're investigating the ownership. The ownership? Her voice shook. Isaiah has cared for that motorcycle longer than some of you have been wearing badges. Kane glanced toward the interview room. Your friend refused to cooperate. Margaret stared at him. That man has spent his entire life serving people who will never know his name. Kane sighed. I'm sure he has. Margaret's expression hardened. You don't believe me. I believe people tell stories when they're in trouble. Isaiah stood behind the glass. Margaret. She looked toward him. Isaiah shook his head once. Don't. He didn't want her revealing anything. Not yet. Margaret understood, but her anger remained. Kane pointed toward the lobby. If you're not involved in this investigation, you'll need to wait outside. Margaret didn't move. You destroyed Danny's motorcycle. It was damaged during an investigation. No. She pointed through the window. You destroyed it because you wanted a man to feel powerless. Kane's face hardened. That's enough. Margaret stepped closer. Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice became steadier. My son trusted Isaiah Grant with his life. Kane reached for the door. Ma'am, and you stood in a public square and treated him like he was nothing. Kane opened the door. You need to leave. Margaret walked toward it. Then she stopped beside him. You keep looking at his old jacket and that broken motorcycle, and you think you've figured out who he is. Kane said nothing. Margaret looked directly into his eyes. You have no idea whose motorcycle you destroyed. The room went silent. Behind them, Brennan's computer suddenly chimed. A new verification message had appeared. And this time, it wasn't asking them to call anyone. Someone was calling them. The phone beside Brennan's computer began ringing. He looked at Kane. Federal verification line. For the first time that afternoon, Kane hesitated. Let it ring. Brennan stared at him. You're serious? I said let it ring. The call stopped. Seconds later, the screen displayed a message. Return contact required regarding Isaiah Grant. Kane reached over and closed the notification. Finish your report. Brennan watched him walk away. Something was wrong, and Kane knew it. 20 minutes later, Margaret was finally allowed into the interview room. The moment the door closed, Isaiah stood. Margaret wrapped her arms around him. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then she pulled back. You're hurt. I'm fine. She looked at the marks around his wrists. That isn't fine. Isaiah gave a tired smile. I've had worse days. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. They destroyed Danny's bike. Isaiah looked through the glass toward the secured parking area. I know. He loved that machine. So did I. Margaret sat beside him. When Danny brought that motorcycle home, your names were practically written all over it. Isaiah smiled faintly. He spent more time fixing it than riding it. He said you were worse. He lied. For the first time since the confrontation began, Isaiah laughed softly. Then the laughter disappeared. Margaret reached for his hand. I still remember the night you came to my house after Danny died. Isaiah looked down. 27 years vanished in an instant. Dust. Heat. A distant explosion. Danny dragging Isaiah behind cover while chaos tore through everything around them. Isaiah had been bleeding badly. Danny could have stayed protected. Instead, he went back. He got Isaiah out. Danny never made it home. He saved my life, Isaiah said quietly. Margaret nodded. And you spent the next 27 years trying to repay something he never expected you to repay? Isaiah looked toward the damaged motorcycle. I promised him his family would always matter. And we know that. The box was supposed to be the last thing. Inside it were Danny's watch, letters he had written but never mailed, photographs Isaiah had protected through countless moves, and one final personal keepsake meant for Danny's daughter. Margaret studied Isaiah. Why didn't you tell those officers? Tell them what? You know exactly what. Isaiah leaned back. Mirank? Yes. No. Why? His answer came quietly. Because they had my identification. They had valid registration. I cooperated. That should have been enough. Margaret Sahil. Isaiah, if 4 stars are what it takes for someone to treat me like a human being, then what happens to the man who doesn't have 4 stars? Neither noticed Brennan standing outside the partially open door. He had heard enough. Not everything, but enough. 4 stars. His eyes widened. He returned immediately to his computer. He searched Isaiah's name again. Nothing useful appeared. Then Brennan tried the restricted verification system. General Isaiah Grant. The screen locked. Authorization required. Brennan leaned back. Oh, God. Across the station, Chief Holloway was reviewing Kane's personnel history. 1 complaint. Then another. Then another. 7 over 6 years. Aggressive detention. Unnecessary property seizure. Inaccurate reporting. Failure to properly document searches. Most had been closed after internal review. Holloway's expression darkened. She called Brennan. Officer. He entered her office. Tell me exactly what happened today. Brennan hesitated. Not Kane's version, Holloway added. Yours. Brennan swallowed. The registration was valid. Holloway waited. He cooperated. And the motorcycle? Dalton knocked it over. Accidentally? Brennan said nothing. That silence answered her. Holloway leaned forward. Is there bodycam footage? Yes. Secure it. Brennan nodded. Now, he returned to his workstation and created a protected evidence copy. Across the room, Kane watched. What are you doing? Standard backup. On whose order? Chief Holloway's. Kane's face tightened. Dalton approached him. We got a problem? Kane looked toward Holloway's office. No, but his voice said otherwise. Then he noticed the viral video playing on another officer's phone. More than 180,000 views. Comments were multiplying. People were demanding names. News pages were reposting it. Kane grabbed Dalton by the arm. Come with me. They entered an empty office. We need to make sure our reports match. Dalton frowned. They already do. Make sure. What about Brennan? Kane looked through the glass. He'll understand what happens to officers who turn on their own. Back in the interview room, Isaiah was finally informed that he would be released while the incident was reviewed. He stood. Margaret looked relieved. But Isaiah didn't. He knew men like Kane rarely accepted losing control quietly. As Brennan approached with the release paperwork, the station's main phone rang again. The desk officer answered. Redwood Falls Police Department. A pause. Her posture immediately changed. Yes, sir. Another pause. Her eyes moved toward Isaiah. Yes, General Grant is here. Kane froze. So did Dalton. The desk officer listened, then covered the receiver. Chief Holloway? Holloway stepped from her office. What? The officer looked around the room. There's a military command office on the line. Kane's face lost some of its color. They're asking why General Isaiah Grant was detained and why nobody returned their verification request. Silence swallowed the station. Kane slowly turned toward Isaiah. For the first time, he wasn't looking at an old black man in a worn riding jacket. He was looking at a question he suddenly feared knowing the answer to. Isaiah calmly picked up his jacket and said nothing. Nobody moved. The words General Isaiah Grant seemed to hang over the station. Kane stared at Isaiah. Then at the desk officer. General? The officer nodded slowly. That's what they said. Dalton's face tightened. Kane recovered first. There are thousands of generals. Brennan looked at him. There aren't thousands of four-star generals. Kane turned sharply. What did you say? Brennan didn't answer. Chief Holloway stepped toward the desk. Transfer the call to my office. Kane followed her. Chief, before you speak to them, you need context. I need facts. You have my report. I also have bodycam footage. That stopped him. Holloway entered her office and closed the door. Kane stood outside. For the first time in 19 years, Travis Kane looked afraid. Dalton approached. What do we do? Kane pulled him toward the hallway. We fixed the timeline. Dalton stared at him. How? Your report says Grant became aggressive before the motorcycle was damaged. That isn't what happened. Kane's eyes hardened. It is now. Dalton looked toward Brennan. The cameras don't explain intent. You told me to hit the bike. Kane stepped closer. Keep your voice down. Dalton swallowed. Kane pointed toward the report room. Rewrite your supplemental statement. Grant moved toward you. You believed he was trying to interfere with the impound. He was cuffed. Then say he attempted to pull away. Dalton hesitated. Kane's voice dropped. We stand together or we go down together. Across the room, Brennan heard enough. He quietly removed the evidence drive containing the protected body cam copy and slipped it into his pocket. Kane noticed. Brennan. Luke stopped. What's in your hand? Evidence. Give it to me. No. The station went silent again. Kane approached him. That wasn't a request. Chief Holloway ordered me to preserve the footage. I'm your supervisor. And that's evidence in an internal review. Kane stared at him. You think Holloway is going to protect you? Brennan said nothing. You stood there too, Luke. Remember that. I do. Kane smiled coldly. Then remember what happens to officers who suddenly decide they're better than everyone they work with. Brennan's jaw tightened. I should have stopped you sooner. The smile vanished from Kane's face. But I'm not helping you lie about it now. Before Kane could respond, Holloway's office door opened. Sergeant Kane, Officer Dalton. My office, now. Kane looked at Brennan one last time, then followed Dalton inside. Isaiah watched everything from beside Margaret. You knew this would happen, Margaret whispered. No. You knew your identity would eventually come back. Isaiah looked toward Holloway's office. I knew the truth would. Minutes later, Isaiah's release was finalized. No charge remained that Holloway was willing to authorize. Brennan brought his belongings. Mr. Grant. Isaiah looked at him. Brennan hesitated. Sir. Isaiah accepted his wallet. You don't need to call me that. Brennan looked ashamed. I should have stepped in sooner. Yes. The answer surprised him. Isaiah continued. You knew something was wrong before the motorcycle hit the ground. Brennan lowered his eyes. I did. Then remember that feeling next time. Brennan nodded. Isaiah placed a hand on his shoulder. Courage isn't knowing the right thing after everything is over. It's deciding the right thing matters while you can still stop the wrong one. Brennan absorbed the words. I preserved the footage. Good. Isaiah put on his jacket. Now preserve the truth. Outside, Margaret drove Isaiah to a small memorial garden on the edge of Redwood Falls. Danny Mercer's name was engraved on a dark stone wall among dozens of others. Isaiah stood before it as evening settled over the trees. Margaret remained several feet behind him. He placed his palm against Danny's name. I'm sorry about the bike. Margaret smiled sadly. If Danny were here, he'd tell you it's just metal. Isaiah almost laughed. No, Danny would spend 3 hours yelling about the tank. That too. Isaiah looked down. I was supposed to bring everything home today. You did. Not the way I wanted. Promises aren't measured by whether the road was easy. Isaiah turned toward her. Margaret nodded toward the wooden box she had recovered from the station. You kept it safe, that's what matters. His phone vibrated. Isaiah looked at the screen and stepped aside. Grant. A man's voice answered. Sir, we heard what happened. Isaiah glanced toward Margaret. Then you've heard too much. The ceremony remains scheduled for 0900 tomorrow. Security wants to send a vehicle for you tonight. No. Sir, I'll be there. At least allow an escort. Isaiah looked toward the damaged motorcycle now resting on a tow trailer nearby. I've had enough escorts for one day. A pause. Yes, sir. Isaiah ended the call. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Tomorrow? Tomorrow. Back at the police station, Kane and Dalton emerged from Holloway's office. Neither looked relieved. Holloway had placed the incident under formal review, but she had not yet suspended them pending further consultation. Kane convinced himself that meant he still had a chance. Then the shift commander approached. Assignments for tomorrow. He handed Kane a sheet. Military ceremony outside town. They requested traffic assistance. You and Dalton are on the south entrance. Kane barely looked at it. Fine. High-level event. Don't be late. The commander walked away. Dalton exhaled. At least it gets us out of here. Kane glanced at the document. Senior military leadership. Distinguished guests. Ceremonial formation. Then he saw the principal guest. His hand stopped. General Isaiah Grant. Kane stared at the name. Dalton noticed. What? Kane said nothing. Travis? Kane read it again. General Isaiah Grant. No. Dalton stepped closer. What is it? Coincidence. What? It's a common name. Dalton looked at him as if he were joking. Isaiah Grant? Kane folded the assignment sheet. There is no way that man is the same person. But even as he said it, he remembered the restricted record. The federal verification line. Margaret's warning, Brennan's pale face, and the military command office calling the station. For the first time, Kane understood that tomorrow might not offer an escape from what happened in Redwood Falls Square. It might put him directly in front of the one man he desperately hoped Isaiah Grant wasn't. The next morning, just before 9, Kane stood at the south entrance of the military ceremony grounds. Rows of uniformed service members stretched across the field. Senior officers arrived one after another. Dalton leaned toward him. That's a lieutenant general. Another vehicle passed. Then another. Kane said nothing. At exactly 9, the entire formation suddenly snapped to attention. A black official vehicle rolled through the gate. Kane felt his stomach drop. It stopped 50 yards away. A senior officer walked toward the rear passenger door. Kane stared. The door began to open. And for the first time since he had smashed that motorcycle, Sergeant Travis Kane realized he might be seconds away from discovering exactly who he had humiliated. The rear passenger door opened. A polished black boot touched the pavement. Then Isaiah Grant stepped out. Kane stopped breathing. Gone were the faded jeans and worn riding jacket. Isaiah wore a formal military uniform now, immaculate from collar to shoes, and on his shoulders were 4 stars. Dalton stared. No. Kane said nothing. He couldn't. A lieutenant general approached Isaiah, stopped sharply, and raised a crisp salute. Good morning, General. Isaiah returned it. Across the field, hundreds of service members stood perfectly still. Kane felt the blood drain from his face. It was him, the same black man he had shoved against a patrol cruiser, the same man Dalton had mocked, the same man whose motorcycle they had destroyed while strangers watched. General Isaiah Grant. Dalton whispered, Travis, shut up. But you said, I said shut up. Isaiah began walking toward the ceremonial platform. Senior officers greeted him along the route, one after another. Colonels, generals, commanders, men and women Kane would have instinctively treated with immediate respect. Every one of them showed Isaiah that respect without hesitation. Kane remembered his own words. You think anybody here cares who you are? His stomach tightened. The ceremony began. Isaiah stood before the formation as the master of ceremonies approached the microphone. Today, we are honored by the presence of General Isaiah Grant, whose decades of leadership and service have shaped thousands of lives. Dalton looked toward Kane. We're finished. Kane's jaw clenched. No. Everybody saw us. We followed procedure. You told me to smash his motorcycle. I told you to secure it. Dalton stared at him. That isn't what happened. Kane turned. Think very carefully about what you say next. Dalton fell silent. After the ceremony, Chief Rebecca Holloway arrived. She had been requested personally. Kane saw her vehicle and immediately understood why. This isn't good, Dalton whispered. Isaiah was speaking with several senior officers when Holloway approached. General Grant. Isaiah turned. Chief Holloway. I wish we were meeting under different circumstances. So do I. Holloway looked uncomfortable. I reviewed part of the footage last night. Part? I wanted to speak with you before completing the internal review. Isaiah glanced toward Kane and Dalton standing near the perimeter. They're here. Yes. Bring them over. Holloway hesitated. General, I want to be clear. Whatever occurred yesterday will be investigated. Isaiah looked at her. I hope so. I also want to apologize personally. Isaiah shook his head. Not yet. Holloway seemed surprised. Sir? An apology before the truth is established is just another way to end an uncomfortable conversation. She absorbed that. Isaiah continued. Bring them here. Minutes later, Kane and Dalton stood before the man they had humiliated less than 24 hours earlier. Kane forced himself to speak. General Grant. Isaiah studied him. Sergeant Kane. Kane swallowed. If I had known. Isaiah's expression changed immediately. That sentence is exactly why we're here. Kane froze. I only meant, if you had known what? Kane had no answer. Mirank? Silence. If you had seen this uniform yesterday, would you have treated me differently? Kane looked down. Isaiah stepped closer. Would you have thrown my motorcycle onto the pavement? No, sir. Would Officer Dalton have struck it with a metal bar? Dalton stared at the ground. No, sir. Would you have written that I was aggressive? Kane's face tightened. I believed you were escalating the situation. Isaiah held his gaze. Then the evidence should support you. Kane looked up. Isaiah's voice remained calm. My rank is not the evidence. He turned toward Holloway. Their cameras are. Kane's expression shifted. Holloway noticed. Isaiah did too. Chief, I want the complete body camera footage preserved. It already is. Good. And the public videos? Collected. Good. Kane stepped forward. General, with respect, body cam doesn't always capture the full context. Isaiah looked at him. Yesterday you seemed confident your report did. Kane had no response. A senior military officer approached. General, if you want our legal office involved. No. Isaiah's answer came immediately. This happened under civilian authority. It should be examined under civilian law. Kane blinked. He had expected influence, pressure, maybe retaliation. Instead, Isaiah was refusing to use the very power Kane suddenly feared. Isaiah looked toward Holloway. And I don't want special treatment. Understood. I mean it. His eyes moved across the field toward the service members still gathering after the ceremony. If this investigation matters only because I'm a 4-star general, then we learned nothing. Holloway nodded slowly. Isaiah continued. Yesterday I had valid registration. I cooperated. I was unarmed. People were recording. His voice lowered, and it still happened. Nobody spoke. What happens to someone who has no witnesses? Brennan arrived at the ceremony grounds in a patrol vehicle. He stepped out carrying an evidence case. Kane saw him. His face changed instantly. Brennan walked directly toward Holloway. Chief, what is it? The protected copy you requested. Kane stepped forward. Luke. Brennan ignored him. Holloway accepted the case. Complete footage? Yes. Unedited? Yes. Brennan looked at Isaiah. And there's something else. Kane's breathing became shallow. What? Brennan turned toward Holloway. Sergeant Kane's written report says General Grant became aggressive before Officer Dalton damaged the motorcycle. Holloway nodded. Brennan continued. That isn't what the body cam shows. Kane interrupted. You're interpreting? Brennan finally looked at him. No. His voice was steady now. I'm telling the truth. Dalton shifted uneasily. Isaiah watched the 3 officers. The frightened subordinate. The nervous accomplice. And the supervisor still fighting to control the story. Then he looked at Holloway. Play it. Here? Yes. Holloway hesitated. Isaiah glanced toward Kane. Yesterday, this happened in public. Then toward the evidence case. The truth doesn't need privacy. A nearby conference facility was opened. The relevant officials entered. Kane sat at one end of the room. Dalton beside him. Brennan across from them. Isaiah remained standing. Holloway connected the evidence system. The monitor illuminated. The first frame appeared. Redwood Falls Square. Isaiah beside his motorcycle. Kane stared at the screen. Then the audio began. His own voice filled the room, and within seconds, everyone would hear exactly what Sergeant Travis Kane had tried to rewrite. Kane's voice came through the speakers. You own that motorcycle? Nobody in the conference room moved. The footage continued. Isaiah handed over his license and registration, calmly, without argument. Then Brennan's recorded voice followed. Sergeant, registration checks out. Chief Holloway glanced toward Kane. Kane stared at the table. On screen, Isaiah asked for the legal basis to search the locked compartment. Then came Kane's response. "You're getting awfully comfortable telling police officers what they can and can't do." Holloway's jaw tightened. The video moved forward. Dalton kicked the side stand. The motorcycle crashed. A few people in the room flinched at the sound. Then Kane picked up Danny's photograph. The camera captured Isaiah holding out his hand. "Give me the photograph." Moments later, Kane dropped it onto the pavement. Then came the handcuffs. Isaiah offered no resistance. Holloway paused the footage. She looked at Kane. "Your report says General Grant attempted to pull away before being restrained." Kane straightened. "That was my perception." "Where?" "The camera angle doesn't show everything." Brennan spoke. "I was standing 6 feet away." Kane turned toward him. Holloway raised a hand. "Let him speak." Brennan took a breath. "General Grant never attempted to pull away." Dalton shifted in his chair. The footage resumed. The broken lock. The wooden box. Isaiah's warning. Then Dalton raised the metal bar. Crack. The first strike crushed the fuel tank. Crack. The second tore through Danny's engraving. Holloway stopped the video again. "Officer Dalton." Dalton looked up slowly. "Why did you strike the motorcycle?" "I was securing it." "With a metal bar?" Dalton said nothing. Kane leaned forward. "He was acting under my direction to facilitate impoundment." Dalton immediately turned. "You told me to do it." Kane froze. "What?" "You said open the compartment." "I did not tell you to damage the vehicle." Dalton stared at him. "You told me to teach him that refusing had consequences." The room went silent. Kane's face hardened. "That is a lie." Dalton almost laughed. "You were ready to make me rewrite my report last night." Holloway leaned forward. "What did he ask you to change?" Kane interrupted. "Chief, I asked Officer Dalton." Dalton swallowed. "He wanted the report to say Grant became aggressive before I damaged the motorcycle." Isaiah remained silent. He didn't look triumphant. He looked disappointed. Holloway turned to Brennan. "Your evidence copy?" "Created before any reports were revised." "And why did you make it?" "Because I realized the written account didn't match what happened." "Why didn't you intervene sooner?" Brennan lowered his eyes. "I was afraid of challenging my supervisor." Isaiah watched him. Brennan continued. "That doesn't excuse it. I saw the situation getting worse, and I waited too long." For the first time that morning, Isaiah nodded. Not forgiveness, acknowledgement. Holloway played Elena Torres's video next. The angle was wider. It showed Isaiah already restrained when Dalton struck the motorcycle. It showed Kane shoving Isaiah against the cruiser. It showed Kane demanding Elena's phone, and it captured Brennan saying clearly, "He's cuffed. He's cooperating." There was nowhere left for Kane to hide. Holloway closed the video. "Sergeant Kane and Officer Dalton, effective immediately, you are relieved of duty pending an independent investigation." Kane stood. "You can't be serious." "Badge and service equipment. I have 19 years on this department. And today we're examining what happened during those 19 years. Kane's expression changed. "What does that mean?" Holloway opened a folder. 7 prior complaints involving aggressive detention, questionable searches, property damage, or inaccurate documentation. Kane stared at her. "Those were closed. They're being reopened." His face went pale. "This is because he's a general." Isaiah finally moved. He stepped toward the table. "No." Kane looked at him. "This is exactly because you're a general. Nobody would care otherwise." Isaiah stopped. For several seconds, he studied Kane. Then he spoke quietly. "You may have just said the most important thing you've said since this began." Kane frowned. Isaiah gestured toward his 4 stars. "You want to know why I didn't tell you?" Kane remained silent. "Because yesterday you had everything you needed to treat me fairly." Isaiah removed his uniform cap and placed it on the table. "You had my identification." One finger touched the table. "My registration." Another. "My cooperation." Another. "And witnesses." He looked directly at Kane. "None of that was enough for you." Kane swallowed. "But this uniform would have been—" No answer. "These stars would have stopped you." Kane finally spoke. "If I had known who you were, obviously the situation would have been handled differently." Isaiah's eyes hardened. "And that's the problem." Silence filled the room. "What if I had been a mechanic?" Kane looked away. "A truck driver?" No answer. "A teacher? A retired factory worker? A father riding home?" Isaiah stepped closer. "What if I had been nobody you were afraid of?" Kane couldn't meet his eyes. "My dignity did not appear this morning when I put on this uniform." Isaiah touched his chest. "I was the same man yesterday." Holloway lowered her eyes. Isaiah turned toward her. "And this cannot end with 2 suspensions." "It won't." I don't want a special investigation because of my rank. You have my word. Then investigate every complaint with the same seriousness you're giving mine. Holloway nodded. All 7. All of them. Brennan looked toward Kane. For years, people had filed complaints and walked away believing nobody would ever listen. Now those voices were coming back. Holloway picked up Kane's badge. This department will cooperate with an independent review of the incident, the previous complaints, supervisory failures, and evidence handling practices. Kane stared at the badge in her hand. For the first time, there was no authority left in his voice. General, Isaiah turned. I made a mistake. Isaiah regarded him quietly. No, Sergeant. Kane waited. A mistake is taking the wrong exit. Isaiah glanced toward the frozen image of Danny's damaged motorcycle on the screen. You had multiple chances to stop. Then he looked back at Kane. You chose not to. Outside the conference room, morning sunlight stretched across the military grounds. The truth was finally visible. But for Isaiah, justice would not be measured by what happened to Travis Kane. It would be measured by what happened the next time an ordinary person stood beside a patrol car with no stars on his shoulders and nobody powerful coming to save him. 4 months later, Redwood Falls Square looked almost exactly as it had before. Children chased pigeons around the fountain. Coffee steamed from sidewalk stands. Motorcycles passed along Main Street. But inside the police department, almost nothing was the same. The independent investigation had lasted 14 weeks. Investigators reviewed body camera footage, reports, dispatch records, personnel files, and every complaint connected to Sergeant Travis Kane. 7 old cases became 11 after former residents learned the investigation had reopened. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Aggressive detentions, questionable searches, property damage, reports that contradicted witnesses. Supervisors who had accepted Kane's explanations without examining the evidence closely enough. Travis Kane was dismissed from the department. Eric Dalton was also terminated after investigators concluded he had intentionally damaged Isaiah's motorcycle and later provided misleading statements about the incident. Luke Brennan received formal discipline for failing to intervene when he first recognized the detention was escalating improperly. He accepted it without appeal, but his decision to preserve the footage, reject Kane's attempt to change the story, and cooperate fully with investigators mattered. He remained an officer. Chief Rebecca Holloway remained too, but she refused to pretend leadership had escaped responsibility. At a public meeting packed with Redwood Falls residents, she stood behind a simple podium. We failed to correct warning signs before they became a public disgrace, she said. That failure belongs to leadership as much as misconduct belongs to the people who committed it. The department announced new requirements for preserving body camera evidence, independent review of repeated complaints, mandatory intervention training, and automatic supervisory review whenever multiple allegations involved the same officer. Then Holloway did something Kane never expected. She invited people whose old complaints had been dismissed to return. We will listen again, she said. Isaiah watched the announcement from the back of the room. No uniform, no medals, just jeans, brown boots, and the same worn riding jacket. Afterward, Holloway approached him. The city council wants to hold an official apology ceremony for you. Isaiah shook his head. No ceremony. General. Isaiah. Holloway smiled slightly. Isaiah, people want to acknowledge what happened, then acknowledge why it mattered. She waited. If you put me on a stage and apologize to a 4-star general, people learn the wrong lesson. What would you rather do? Isaiah looked around the room. Give that stage to the people nobody listened to. 2 weeks later, Redwood Falls held a community accountability forum. There were no military formations, no salutes, no ceremonial vehicles. Ordinary residents stood and told their stories. A mechanics, a nurse, a delivery driver, a retired teacher, people whose complaints had once existed only as case numbers in closed files. Isaiah sat among them and listened. That afternoon, he drove to Margaret Mercer's house. A familiar sound greeted her before she opened the door, a motorcycle engine. Margaret stepped onto the porch and froze. The 1978 Ironwood V-twin stood in the driveway. Restored. The mirror had been replaced. The damaged compartment had been repaired. The chrome shone again. But the fuel tank was different. Margaret walked closer. You left the dent. Isaiah nodded. The worst damage had been repaired, but a shallow scar remained beside Danny's engraving. Brothers make it home. You could have made it perfect, Margaret said. No. Isaiah ran his fingers over the scar. Perfect would pretend nothing happened. Margaret smiled through tears. You always were stubborn. Danny was worse. He absolutely was. Isaiah removed the wooden box from the repaired compartment. Margaret's smile disappeared. He carried it inside. Danny's daughter, Rachel, was waiting in the living room. She was an adult now, older than her father had been when he died. Isaiah placed the box before her. I should have brought this years ago. Rachel opened it carefully. Letters, photographs, the old watch. Then she found the final item wrapped in cloth. Danny's identification tags. Rachel covered her mouth. Isaiah looked away for a moment. He gave those to me before our last operation together. Rachel touched them gently. Why did you keep them? He told me that if anything happened, I should bring them home. Her eyes filled. You did. Isaiah shook his head. 27 years late. Margaret placed a hand on his shoulder. No. Isaiah looked at her. You brought Danny home every time you remembered him. For a long moment, nobody spoke. There was no rank in that room. No general, no ceremony. Just 3 people remembering someone they loved. Later, Isaiah returned to Redwood Falls Square. Elena Torres happened to be buying coffee at the same stand where everything had begun. She recognized him immediately. General Grant? Isaiah smiled. Isaiah works. She laughed. You know that video has millions of views now? So I've been told. People say you're the reason Kane was finally removed. Isaiah shook his head. No. Elena looked confused. You kept recording when somebody with authority told you to stop. Brennan preserved evidence when doing so could hurt his career. Margaret refused to let Danny's story be dismissed. Other people came forward. He looked across the square. Justice usually has more than one set of hands. Elena nodded toward his motorcycle. You fixed it. Mostly. She noticed the scar. You missed a spot. No. Isaiah smiled faintly. I kept one. He put on his gloves. Before leaving, he looked toward the place where Kane had forced him against the cruiser. Months earlier, he had stood there handcuffed, while strangers wondered whether he had done something wrong. Then the world discovered his title. 4 stars had transformed public perception overnight. But Isaiah knew something those stars could never change. He had deserved dignity before anyone knew his name. Before the uniform. Before the salute. Before the reveal. He started the motorcycle. The old engine came alive. No convoy waited for him. No security vehicle followed. Nobody stood at attention. Isaiah preferred it that way. He pulled onto Main Street and headed toward the highway. The buildings of Redwood Falls slowly disappeared behind him. Ahead stretched miles of open Virginia road. His hand rested briefly against the repaired fuel tank. Beneath his glove, he could feel the faint scar beside Danny's words. Brothers make it home. Isaiah smiled. Then he rode forward. Because respect should never require a resume. Dignity should never depend on wealth. Justice should never arrive only after discovering that the person being mistreated is powerful. And no human being should need 4 stars on his shoulders before someone decides his rights matter. Sometimes the true measure of character is not how we treat powerful people, but how we treat someone when we believe they have no power at all. A person's worth is never created by a uniform, title, bank account, or rank. True justice begins when we give the same dignity to the unknown stranger that we would give to someone powerful. If Isaiah's story meant something to you, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that remind us why dignity always matters.